Hello everyone, we are back with another video and today we thought we'd film a video about what we've read recently. Recently is a very vague word.
This year.
Yeah, maybe in the second half of the year, let's say.
I would say during the year.
Okay.
Yeah, because I didn't have so much time to read, but we've decided to talk about some of the books that we have. I don't know if you've chosen only books that you've liked very much.
I didn't have that wide of a selection.
No.
Mainly ones that I can still remember.
Okay,
Yeah.
that is good. Okay, so the first book which I don't have with me at the moment is The Bear and the Nightingale by Catherine Arden. This is a series, I think it's called the Winter Night Trilogy, and this first book was published in 2017. And I really expected to love the entire series. What I will say from the get-go is that I liked very much the first volume, The Bear and the Nightingale, and then the series went in some ways a bit downhill for me. Not very, very much, so I wouldn't say that I completely disliked the series, but I expected to love it more, and I think I've told you about it as well.
Probably.
The premise of the book is something that I still think I would really, really enjoy. The protagonist, Vasilisa Petrovna, she is a girl that lives with her family in the territory that is now Russia, and she lives in a very remote area, but when she's born, she has a very close-knit family. The thing is that her mother dies when she's born, so she's basically raised around her siblings and her father until her father remarries a woman that I think might be considered by some to be a villain, but I don't consider her a villain. She's a woman.
Is this a Russian Cinderella?
I wouldn't say that it is. No, I think it resembles in certain ways, but very, very loosely, Deathless, but not so much. The book is based on many folklore tales from the Russian folklore, and I think that the first volume really transmits that feeling of winter, being in winter, of it being very cold outside, and being surrounded by all these creatures that are part of the Russian folklore, which is something that I really, really enjoyed. I really liked the protagonist in this book. I think she is a very wise person. She seems a bit farther away from civilization and from other people. She's very unique. She knows a lot, and she's very involved in this life of mythological creatures. She can see them, she talks to them, she leaves food for them. But then when her stepmother comes into the scene, things change because she's very religious. And she can see these creatures, these mythological creatures as well. I think this is not, it might be considered a spoiler, but I think it's a mild spoiler. And she also comes with a priest from Moscow who doesn't really want to be there either. And who will work very hard to make people get rid in their hearts and their minds of these beliefs that they have, and believe solely in religion, which will be something very interesting. And I think that the character of the priest is a very interesting character. I would say that he can be considered a villain, definitely, because of certain things that happen with him, but as a character he's a very complex character, and I wish that we would have seen more of him in the other volumes as well. I think this is mainly one of the parts that I think lacked in other books, but speaking only about The Bear and the Nightingale, I would recommend that book. I think that the next books might be a hit or miss for a large variety of people. The ending of The Bear and the Nightingale felt to me a bit YA, without saying too much, I would say there is some sort of battle happening at the end, which I didn't really.
I remember you told me about this.
Yeah, I didn't really fell for that. I feel like the majority of the book has a very different tone from that ending, and I also think that certain characters die, which it's not that they shouldn't have died. The author could have worked more on them and taken more from their characters, and delivered that to the audience if they had stayed alive. I think that would have been very interesting to see them progress forward. So yeah, that's one of the books that I read. All in all, I really liked The Bear and the Nightingale.
It sounds really. I mean, I like this sort of contrast between paganism and Christianity. Yeah. But at the same time, I think it's a bit too YA for me.
Yeah, I think it is. I didn't expect it to be YA, as I've said. I would say that the majority of the book you would really like, and then the ending might
spoil everything.
Might spoil it for you. Yeah.
Oh, and I think maybe you also didn't enjoy it that much because maybe you had certain expectations from Deathless.
I think so.
Which is on a completely different level.
Yeah.
And maybe because it's similar in terms of
the Russian folklore
and stuff. Maybe you had certain expectations and it didn't.
The protagonist is also this wild girl type, which I think works very well in a certain context. What I really liked about her in the first volume is that she is in her element. She feels very much a part of what she's surrounded by, so the woods, the rivers. She seems very much like one of these creatures, one of these mythological creatures, and she seems she is a very wise character in that way. Her interactions with this priest that I'm telling you about, Konstantin Nikonovich is his name.
Great name.
Their interactions are very interesting. They are very creepy at points. But the way in which she talks to him and how he comes to view her is a very interesting dynamic. But then in the other volumes, when she's taken out of her element and this element of mythological creatures is a bit downplayed, I would say, in favor of a more political plot, which in other books I would love, but in this one I didn't expect it to be so prominent. I think it loses a lot of its magic, I would say.
Yeah, it's interesting because now I'm reading about the way in which the Irish had this sort of connection with fairies and other sort of mythological creatures, and it's very similar in the sense that they were very connected to everything around them through those creatures, and it's like this sort of different world was able to intervene into their lives, and so they were very interconnected. And I think that's similar to Russian folklore as well, and the connection they had there.
Yeah, that's true. All in all, give it a try. See if you like it. You too, maybe.
Maybe not. Alright, so the first book that I'm going to talk about is this one. And this is Cassandra by Crystal Wolf. And I have a lot of opinions about this one. So it's a retelling of the Trojan War from the point of view of this character Cassandra, who was Hector's sister, and yes, and she was also a priestess, and she had struck this bargain with the gods, through which she was able to see the future. But the other side of the coin is that nobody believed her when she did make a prophecy. Okay, first of all, let's look at this beautiful, beautiful cover. I adore it. It's so nice. And it gives off that sort of classical feeling. And I'm very, very picky when it comes to retellings of classical myths and stories and so on, because I did study Latin language and literature at university, and so I I have certain standards of what such a retelling should look like, and I feel like most of them today aren't that good in the sense that they lose their authenticity and they lose their dignity in a sense, because they are transformed into these.
I think you would say that they are written for a modern
Yes, they're written
audience.
for a modern audience, and they're written from the point of view of a modern
So
mentality.
With a modern mentality in mind. You
Yes.
don't have that mentality from those times. You don't
Exactly,
work with that.
exactly. I feel like we overlook the fact that they had different values than we did, and they lived in different ways, and we kind of impose our values onto their stories. And I understand the appeal of mainly looking at the feminine voices in these stories, because it is true that
They're lacking.
they're lacking, but it matters how you do it as well, because you can't take a modern woman and place her into ancient Greece or ancient Rome and pretend like it fits. It doesn't.
Yeah.
So I have a lot of opinions about that, and I think, well, I might be an elitist, of course, but but I think that someone who writes such a retelling should have certain knowledge surrounding the ancient culture and civilization. Otherwise, it will just feel out of place and very trivial, I think.
Yeah.
And to trivialize, these stories that are at the basis of our civilization is a bit of a crime, if you ask me. But I picked this up because I've heard really good things about it, and it isn't exactly recent. I think it was written in the 80s or so, so it's not part of this new trend.
Movement.
Yes,
Yeah.
new movement. And I thought I'd give it a go, and I'm so happy that I did. This is so good. Now, I don't know if Krista Wolf, I don't think she actually had studies
Yeah.
to support this narrative, but I think that she did do her duty from that point of view. She tried to convey the spirit of the ancients as well. It's told from the point of view of Cassandra, of course, and it's a heavy narrative, so it's dense. It's hard to read. It takes you a while to get used to this sort of style.
So it's not an easy read, you would say.
Not at all, not at all.
Even though it's a short book.
It's quite short. It doesn't have any chapters. It's just one continuous narrative. But I think she has such a style that does justice to the myth, because it does preserve that dignity. I don't think these things should be that easy to read. I don't think they should have. I've read books where the characters talk as if they were American teenagers, just for the sake of being accessible to today's audience. At times it almost feels like a ritual, or like like ancient Greek tragedies, how they had that moment of catharsis when the audience should have been purified and emerged as something completely different. I feel like it has that sort of moment, and it is heavy from the point of view of it's very realistic. We are talking about a war at the end of the day. I've seen books that focus so much on
the
Achilles. Yes, on
And
Achilles and the
yeah.
tragedy of romance and whatever. No, this is looking at the actual tragedy of war and how violent that is and how heavy that is. So it's definitely not an easy read.
It also
Yes.
has a lot of force behind.
Right,
narrative.
yes, I do want to mention this.
Yeah.
It's a very powerful book. The way that Krista Wolf builds this, it's forceful. It blows you away. At the end of it, it's like you've been battered. So I have only words of praise for this, and I wish more books like these would be written. I'd love to see, since there's this movement, as we've called it, of looking at female narratives from ancient times. I'd love to see a retelling of Dido and Aeneas.
Okay.
So on the
I heard
Roman
this
side,
one.
because
Okay.
Dido is such an interesting character. Obviously, she was this queen of Carthage. You know, she had this
Mhm.
status. She was a very good queen at that, and it would be so interesting to see how love for Aeneas transformed her from a queen into a woman in love, and how disastrous that was for her.
I mean, isn't it usual?
Yes, we can say that. So that's, I would be happy if someone with expertise would do that.
Would do that. Yeah, and I think you're right. I don't mean to say that, like you've said, I wouldn't want this to be understood in an elitist way, but I think that as with every topic that's very complex and we don't have so much connection to that topic anymore, I think it's very important to do your due diligence, to do research, and be respectful to that topic and present it in such a way that it represents that topic in its true essence,
Exactly.
so that we don't try to modify that or tailor it according to what we believe now. I know this is a difficult thing, but I think it's worth doing that because I think it gives a lot of value to a book. It makes
Yeah.
it stand out as opposed to all the other books.
I think we should pay our respect to these narratives. I mean, instead of taking advantage of them, right, and taking them and transforming them into whatever
Into
we
something
want.
completely different, yeah.
Yes, I think they deserve a bit more respect at that.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. I agree. Now, the next book that I'm going to talk about, I don't want to be unkind, but I don't think it holds a candle to this one that we've just spoken about. And it's a book by one of your favorite authors, Jules Verne.
Oh God. I don't mean to be disrespectful. I haven't read anything from him since I was in middle grade, but I trust my middle grade self.
Say it. You thought it was boring.
It was the most boring thing in the world. Yes.
Now, I would say, as an explanation, that I do read about 1 or 2 books by Jules Verne a year. And one of the books that I read by him was this one, which is, again, I don't have it with me, but it's the Thompson Travel Agency. This one is, for a Jules Verne book, quite funny. Now, I'm not going to say that this is one of the main reasons why I'm recommending it, because I think it's quite funny. It does have a character that is very ironical. He makes these rude observations, I would say, but that can be considered funny, and this is Mr. Saunders. The plot of the book revolves around a cruise, I would say, that this bunch of characters do in is it in the Mediterranean Sea? In the beginning of the book talks about 2 agencies, 2 travel agencies, rivals, that keep lowering the prices for their cruises so that people go to one or the other. And then one of the travel agencies, this Thompson Travel Agency, drops the prices so much that everyone moves to this cruise and then no one goes to the rival's cruise. And there's a plot twist related to this. Jules Verne doesn't really do that. I mean, you can easily spot his plot twists. But anyway, so our main character, who's a Frenchman, his name is, and my French is not that good, but Robert Morgan, something like that. Robert Morgan, with an English accent. He is in a bit of a dire situation, and he discovers the existence of this cruise and that it's going to happen, and so he thinks he could get employed as a translator, I think, because he's very good with foreign languages, and so he is employed. And he goes on this cruise, but this cruise is a complete disaster. Now, I'm not going to give any more details about that, but considering that the prices have been lowered so much, I think that we can see from the beginning that
the quality of people,
the quality of the services, the quality of everything. It's quite funny from that point of view. I think it's a relaxing read, and I would definitely recommend it. Now, as far as Jules Verne books go, this is not my favorite, but I did find it very enjoyable, an easy read, and I think that it can be read by people who don't really care about Jules Verne much, not necessarily you, of course, but I think it's very nice how he depicts, this is one of the things I love most about him, how he depicts nature and traveling, and he knows so much about navigation and geography and geology, and you can really see that he cares about these topics because he goes on long tangents about them, very, very long.
Yeah, well, you have, a fetish for that, so that's
No.
that's your business.
No. I would really recommend it if you know someone, or if you're someone who really likes reading books about traveling, about not the dangers, well, also the dangers, but the perks of traveling, and about those horrible moments when nothing is prepared and you have to improvise at all points, and then you get used to having to improvise all the time, and you want to have fun with that, with such a story, then I would definitely recommend The Thompson Travel Agency by Jules Verne.
Right. The next book that I'm going to talk about and that I've read recently, relatively recently, was Carmilla by Sheridan Le Fanu.
Yeah.
This is more of a novella, I would
Okay.
say, so it's not, it's very short. And this is basically the origin of every vampire story. I know everybody thinks it's Dracula, we thought so as well,
Yeah,
but
we did.
it's actually Carmilla, so it's actually a female vampire. And it's such a good novella. So this one takes place in Austria,
Okay.
so Central Europe more than Eastern Europe, but it also takes place in a castle, so that's one of the characteristics of being a vampire. You have to have a castle. We have a castle.
Okay.
We have a young lady there. She's called Laura,
Okay.
and her father.
Okay.
Right, and then one day they meet this mother and her daughter.
Ah, okay.
All right, and the daughter is Carmilla.
Okay.
And the mother pretends that she has to very quickly go somewhere. I think they have some sort of a carriage accident, and so Carmilla isn't feeling exactly very well, and she's left with Laura and her father. And Laura and Carmilla strike up a nice little friendship, which has very erotic tendencies, if you ask me. Which again, very interesting for that time. I think it was written in, I don't know,
was it the 1800s?
1800s, I think.
Okay.
Yes. I think that Laura gets weaker and weaker, and Carmilla has strange behavior. She is gone during the night, and they don't exactly know where she's going, and anyway, it turns out that she's a vampire, that she's dead, that they have to cut off her head or something like that in order to kill
That's a
her.
classical
Yeah.
treatment when it comes to vampires.
Exactly. I don't exactly remember all the other characteristics, but I do remember that the characteristics of a vampire, that's where they come from, and obviously Stoker, that's where he got them from and made them introduce Dracula character. And I found it as entertaining as Dracula, so it's funny in times, it's surprising, and very gothic, obviously. That was
Carmilla. Okay, putting that on my to-read list. Now the next book that I'm going to talk about that I also don't have with me is Anna Karenina by Tolstoy. I was expecting, again, like with The Bear and the Nightingale, to be blown away by this book.
It has a good reputation.
It does.
As far as I've
And I
seen.
think it's a good classical book. Now I have to admit, this is my first Tolstoy book. And I kept drawing comparisons between Anna Karenina and books that I read from Dostoevsky, which didn't, I mean, wasn't so, which wasn't so flattering for Anna Karenina. Now I know this is one of many people's favorite books, but I have to say that I liked the most the parts that are not about Anna and Vronsky and Karenin. The parts I liked most in this huge novel were about Levin, the characters of Levin and Kitty, and how they get to, well, to their very awkward courtship, which I found to be very realistic, not in terms of, well, their courtship and their married life. But Levin is a very hardworking person. He's a very interesting combination. So he does have money and he is the owner of a large property, but he struggles with his desire to make things better and more efficient for his community, and he's very upset when the people who work for and with him are lazy and dismiss change, and are very reluctant to implement modern inventions in their day-to-day lives just because they're not used to them, or they think that things have worked very well up until that point and why should they change them. So you can really feel his frustration. He starts being a bit arrogant about certain things, and he's a very headstrong character. So he conveys and he transmits to the reader lots of feelings. You can get very frustrated with him. He's a young person as well, I would say, and I think the only thing that might prove to some people to be a bit, well, I wouldn't call it creepy, because it was something that was happening during that time, but he marries Kitty, who is a very young girl. I think she's 18 or 19 when we first meet her, but he loves her very much. And even so, he does make a lot of mistakes. You can really see how at the beginning of their marriage they do struggle quite a lot. They're both very emotional and they're very happy, but at the same time they're not used to being married. So you can see that I really liked that part. But the part about Anna and Vronsky and Karenin, I did find a bit boring. I have to say, from that point of view, I think that the book could have been much shorter. But when it comes to Anna, I did find her a superficial character. She's definitely not a character that's easy to love. And I think that's intentional. She's a woman that's been somehow pushed by society and by other people into this marriage. And she's content with her life, with her husband and her son, up until a certain point when she, I think, realizes that she hasn't really lived. She doesn't realize that by making certain choices, she has basically denied herself the possibility of a normal life in the way that she was used to live. And it's a bit frustrating to read those parts, because it's obvious to the reader that of course she won't be able to have the life that she used to because of the decisions she's made. So I think, just to generally wrap that up, I think I gave this 3 stars, this book 3 stars on Goodreads.
You don't really like narratives that are so realistic, I feel like.
Not so much realistic, because I do like books that have a realistic narrative, but I think I am very partial on unlikable characters.
You are.
I don't think I will, well, never say never, but I won't say, I don't think I will ever truly love a book about an unlikable character, and that's Anna Karenina for me.
Yeah, I'm different from that point of view. I really appreciate unlikable characters for the fact that they're unlikable.
They're very human, and she's definitely very human. I think what I would say, and I definitely, I mean, between parentheses, who am I to make the analysis of a Tolstoy book, but I think the ending of Anna Karenina With respect to Anna, so I won't go too much into that. I think many people know about how the book ends, but I won't say it. I think that's very well written, and I did feel very sorry for her at that point, and I think that the way in which her mind works by that time is very interesting to follow. It's almost as if she's in a daze and she's more in her mind than in the world. She doesn't live in the world anymore. She lives in her mind. But she probably feels like this world is not worth it anymore. And those scenes are very, very well written, I would say. I truly, truly loved them. I really want to try and read more from Tolstoy. I really want to read War and Peace.
I've also heard really, really good things about
War and
so
Peace. I think I might like that more because it's about war.
Yes.
So I did read that Tolstoy goes on long tangents about military strategy and all
great.
that, and I think I would like that. We shall see.